Welcome to my presentation. In this presentation, we shall try to understand the basics and concepts related to decimals. So the question we have is, what is a decimal and how do we represent a number in a decimal notation? So a number written in a decimal notation has three parts to it. So let's take an example. So let me explain this decimal notation with an example. Let's say we have a number 1.2 that is in a decimal notation. Let's say we have another number 21.34 that is in a decimal notation. Let's say we have another number as 0.25 that is in a decimal notation. In all of these examples, we are seeing that there are three parts to it. The first part has a whole number part to it. The second part is the decimal point, and the third part is the decimal place. So let me explain the three parts in here in this example. Let's say I have a number 12.34. The first part here, let me write this. This first part here is the whole number part. Whole number part, and this point is called the decimal point, and the third one after the decimal point, that part is called the decimal place, the decimal part. So we normally read these types of numbers as 12.34. That is how we want to distinguish decimal numbers from whole numbers. So we encounter decimal numbers on a regular basis, and I want to relate that to the related to money, because we are dealing with money on a regular basis. And if we were to take $1, and if we were to divide it into quarters, we have 4 quarters in $1. So quarter is 1/4 of $1, or we can also say that as it is 25 cents in 25 cents, and 25 cents is 1/4 of $1. So we are talking about two different notations in here. One we are talking in terms of fractions, the other one we are talking in decimal notation. So let us try to relate that to reality, and we want to see how we can convert fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. So to explain that, I want to go back to this line diagram, which we talked about several times in our other presentations. And here, if I were to call one end of this line diagram as 0, and if I were to call the other end as 1, and to make it a little bit more interesting, if I were to call this as $0, and if I were to call this as $1, and if I were to represent fractions in the numerator in the top part of this line diagram, let me write here fractions, and let me write decimals here. And now we are ready to explain the relation between fractions and decimals. So the relation is as follows. If I were to divide this $0 to $1 into half, I can represent half a dollar as a fraction as follows, isn't it? 1/2 dollar. 1/2 is a fraction, and the same thing I can represent it in terms of decimals as 0.50. That is 50 cents. So that is how we are able to process the information of fractions and decimals in our mind. So if I were to take $0 and half a dollar and divide it into half, I can represent that as 1/4 of $1, or it is same as saying it is 25 cents, or I can read it in terms of decimal format as $0.25. And on the other hand, if I were to come in here and then look at the part between half and one full dollar, In terms of fractions, I can represent that as 3/4 of a dollar in terms of fractions, and in terms of decimals, I can represent that as $0.75 in terms of decimal numbers. So this is the relation between fractions and decimals, and this is how we process information with respect to money on a regular basis. In this presentation, we shall see several examples related to decimals. We will see simple operations based on these decimals, such as addition. How do we add decimals? How do we subtract decimals? How do we multiply decimals? How do we divide decimals? And we'll also see some practical examples related to decimals in my other presentations. So in my next presentation, we shall see how to represent decimals using the place value chart.